Really good to be with you. And as Nathan said, I'll say a few things, and more than happy to take questions and interact over the information shared. You won't find all the answers here. Obviously, we won't cover everything that's possible to cover on this topic. We'll just touch on a few things. I'm kind of giving a bird's eye view today on this vast area of, mental health issues, and I'll focus on a few specific points and thoughts. So, understanding and interacting with mental health issues. Just to say thank you for your interest and the invitation. And I've been struck by how keen Nathan is to open up discussion about this topic and kind of remove, unhelpful stigma and prejudice against it, and make it something that's open for discussion and not too hard to talk about, and something which we want to learn together and get God's help in dealing with, because it's very real, isn't it? A bit about myself. So I have a kind of a vested interest in this as someone whose own faith journey began following a mental health struggle of my own 30 plus years ago. Essentially, kind of a nervous breakdown, which brought me to the end of myself, which led me to question everything about life, which threw me into real turmoil. And praise be to God, it was a faithful Christian pastor who came along my path at that time, who was able to counsel and support and guide, bringing the gospel to me, leading me into faith, nurturing me, shepherding me thereafter, which really set me on a much better track than the one I was on, And it then kind of made sense that in terms of what I wanted to do with my life, I sort of wanted to help people in the same way in which I've been helped. So I found my way into medicine and then psychiatry or mental health, and which is the closest thing to pastoral care, I think, in the medical field. And then in my own church background and church journey, I've been involved in various forms of pastoral care. One of which is a small men's group, which I've been running for a number of years, which I'll talk about a bit later on. So I've got kind of a personal, professional, and pastoral interest in this topic. I wanted to put a picture up, and that's one of the few pictures I have of myself on my iPad. And I thought, okay, that's going to explain how I'm quite a practical person as well, and I like to kind of apply things to real life and test out, do things that actually work in real life. And that's a picture of me visiting a so-called famous art gallery somewhere in North America. And I kid you not, this blank white square board was being hung up and put forward as this piece of art. And I was going, what? That doesn't make sense to me. Not very practical. So what are mental health issues? I think about them in these three broad categories. First of all, mental disorders or mental illnesses, things which have a label, and there are lots of them. Some of them have familiar acronyms like OCD and PTSD and ADHD, so things which have been studied in some detail, categorized, put down in manuals and catalogs, and which can become labels for collections of symptoms. And there are pros and cons of doing it this way, which we might touch on a bit later. But you've got sort of these sort of more clinical labels and conditions. There is a much bigger and more applicable category to the wider population, what we call problems in living. And it's just the stuff that literally all of us face from time to time, sometimes a lot of the time, and these are the pressures and the stresses of life that can get us down, that can burden us, that can preoccupy us, that can make us anxious, and it can relate to work life and family life and relationships and finances, and the football team we support, and all sorts of things, can really affect us, and make life difficult, and make us, stop and have to try and refocus and gather ourselves and look for help and gain strength. And then there are a group of struggles which are essentially spiritual in nature, which would become, more apparent if you are a person of faith, And I'm thinking about things like guilt over a besetting sin, a lack of assurance about salvation, frequent, oppression by darkness and by the enemy, things which are quite particular to people of faith. So if you take this broad definition of mental health issues, that's everyone, right? Nobody is excluded. And if you are, I'd like to meet you and tell me how you do it, And Christians are not immune. In fact, some might argue that Christians in some instances are more vulnerable to certain types of mental struggles. Christians can set very high expectations of themselves. And if you're somebody who struggles with sort of low self-worth and trying to always please other people, and if that stemmed from the kind of upbringing where, you never really felt quite validated and you always had to please your parents, can you imagine when you become a believer and you have a heavenly Father whose standards are much higher than your earthly parents, and if you're still trying to please, and if you're still trying to, not put a foot wrong, that can create tremendous pressure, which if it's not properly handled, can be quite depressing. What we're not going to be able to do this evening is to go into the myriad different conditions, depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia and addictions in any kind of detail. But I will refer you to a couple of resources. One is a website, Christian website, which breaks down different conditions and tells you, what are they, what contributes to it, how to think about it Christianly, how to help, etc., etc. And then another resource is a book by a former colleague of mine who writes about 6 topics in particular. Yeah, and he does so in the format of here's some professional information about the topics, and then here is some pastoral approaches to thinking about those topics. So a very useful resource if you want to find out more about those particular topics. Why bother? Nathan, in his introduction, in his prayer, explained that. It's something that's on God's heart, the call to preach the gospel to the poor and to heal the brokenhearted and to set the captive free, is in the very heart of God himself. And as his people, as his church, that's what we do. It's what we want to be involved in as well. And there's a quote that sticks in my mind. I think it was an early church father. The glory of God is a human fully alive. And when we help people, when we come alongside people and try and help them, take a step towards health and wholeness and vitality and life, we are helping them fulfill their potential in Christ. We live in a fallen, messy world. You don't need me to tell you that. You experience that every day, I suspect. We're contending all the time with sin, Satan, and suffering. We see it all around us. One of the questions I like to ask when I do kind of things, do you think life is more stressful now than it was 20 years ago? Who thinks it is? Okay. About half. Yeah, there's no right answer to that. On the one hand, because of technology, social media, the pace and complexity and how much we're exposed to, and the information overload, and how quickly bad news travels around the world, certainly has to be creating a much more anxiety prone and anxiety conscious society. So I think that's very real. Having said that, on the other hand, I didn't live through World War II or the Cuban Missile Crisis or other things which have happened in the past, which must have been stressful, incredibly stressful at those times. I think climate change is something that's very much in our consciousness now, and that's that adds a lot of stress. And then wars. You don't need me to say how sobering and how concerning and how worrying it is to see what's going on in different parts of the world today. So all of that has an impact on us, on our minds, on our hearts, on how we go about our business. So one way of thinking about mental health issues is to keep in mind a broad approach, a holistic model. And this is the most common one that I'm familiar with, and it's very straightforward. It's simply thinking about things in terms of the biological or the physical, the psychological or the mental, the social in terms of our culture and our society and our relationships, and then the spiritual for those of us who have an awareness and faith in that area, and all those things can be relevant when it comes to the cause of mental health issues and the treatment of mental health issues. So when I see someone, when I'm trying to help someone, I'm thinking, right, are there physical factors? Are there genetics? Are there physical health issues? Is there unhealthy lifestyle issues? I'm thinking psychological. What was the person's early background? How do they see the world? How do they think about things? What's the orientation of their minds? Social, what's their living situation? What's their employment status? How are their relationships? How's the family? And then spiritual, where do they stand in terms of spiritual things? So the main point here is to think more broadly and think holistically, because it's very, very seldom, if ever, that anyone's problems or mental health matters are going to be down to one thing. It's usually a combination of different things all working together. And that's an important point to when you're face to face with someone, you really don't know all that's going on, because there can be so many layers and so many aspects of it, and no one, myself included, can have knowledge and mastery over all the different areas that a person can struggle with, which is why we need to work as teams and why we need to work together. And there's no one person who is an expert in the whole thing. So we're kind of thinking about, how can we be effective helpers? And I keep this very simple model in my mind. Again, if I'm face to face with someone, vision. What do I, or rather, Lord, help me see this person as you see them. Help me to just kind of see the potential and see the hope and see a vision for what this person can become and what this person can learn in the midst of their struggles. Secondly, I'm seeking understanding, because before you can help someone, you really want to understand. And one of my mentors said to me, one of the most important things that help someone make progress in their treatment, is that feeling of being understood by somebody else. The feeling that someone gets them. And the more you're able to convey and actually have a sense of, I get you, I understand you, to that extent will you be able to be helpful to that person. And then helping. So the question we ask is, how can I help? What can I do? What can I realistically do? In a church context, it's going to be one part of the overall helping plan for someone, because you're going to need other people to do other things. But you can ask, what can I do in my setting to help this person? I just put there what we call a sort of a formulation. A formulation simply means a way of understanding the information presented to us. And this is something that we use quite a lot in mental health practice, the 5 Ps. And it's simply a way of thinking logically about a person. So somebody presents with problems. So they present with their problems, but behind those problems, there's usually things which have predisposed the person to those problems. And it could be, genetics or physical health, upbringing, social situation. And then there are things that sort of precipitate the problems. Something has come along usually significant life events or some internal health issue that has, tipped someone over the edge or led someone to having more significant clinical level problems. Yeah. And then there are often things which once the problems have started that perpetuate the problems, what I call perpetuating factors. So things which keep the cycle going. Vicious cycles being an example. Someone who is very depressed, and has no drive and no energy, can easily become passive and inactive. But when you become passive and inactive, there's no focus or purpose to your life. So what happens? You become more depressed, and the more depressed you become, the more inactive you become, and that can go on and on and on until that cycle is broken. That's a perpetuating cycle. And then we also like to think, not all negative, but in the midst of all that, what are the protective, what are the positive things, what are the strengths that we can draw upon to help this person navigate their difficulties and to be more resilient in the face of challenges? And I would like to be able to say that for a believer, the fellowship of believers and the ministry of the local church could be a protective factor, not a precipitating factor. Doing okay so far? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Yes, I thought I'd cover a few qualities for effective helping, on the assumption that you're here today because you want to learn how you can help more. I'm presuming that. I'm thinking that. Yeah. So just sort of, but by no means an exhaustive list. Self-aware humility. So a recognition that you yourself have your own issues and your own weaknesses and your own brokenness, and you're not ashamed of that. You're just aware of it, and you're also aware that it is an avenue by which you experience God's grace, an avenue in which you have to draw upon strength for yourself, which is exactly the way God sets things up. He enables us, he allows us to sense our own weakness and our own dependence on him, so that we may seek after him and lean on him and become dependent on him. Curious non-judgmentalism. That's when you come with an open mind. That's when you come seeking to actively listen and understand before speaking too soon, before forming judgments, before jumping to conclusions, before judging someone. An open mind. And active listening ties in with that. You're really trying to understand someone's story and where they're coming from without feeling undue pressure to start giving advice or to start giving conclusions. Getting the gospel. And by this I mean getting it for yourself before being able to share it with others. Yeah? So are we regularly, reminding ourselves of what it means to be forgiven, redeemed, empowered, transformed, changed, given hope? Is it real in our lives to the extent that we really have a powerful message to share with somebody else? Otherwise, it's not real. Somebody said, if we're going to get into the helping business, thick skin, soft heart. 7 points or seven areas, 7 principles of mental well-being that I've put to you. We can only touch on this in very general terms. And these are kind of like the building blocks of mental well-being, or some of the building blocks of mental well-being. Glad surrender, by that I mean, again, from a Christian point of view, a willingness to bring our issues before the Lord and to stand before him and say, God, help. What do I do with this? I'm really struggling with, I'm really wrestling with this one. This is real to me. I surrender to you. What help, guide me, teach me your ways, show me your paths in this. Number 2, getting help, if necessary, which is often always, again, and that could be, help from family and friends, help from your church, help from professionals, but a willingness to get help. Thirdly, attending to things under the category of healthy lifestyle, attending to things that, are within your gift, not easy by any means, but, watching what you eat, keeping active, doing some exercise, getting enough sleep, getting fresh air, drinking water, simple things which are available to everyone, but I do get it, easier said than done. And if you're struggling mentally, that can be quite hard to do. But there are things we can look into and do something about. These days, there are lots of resources in terms of psychological principles that people can apply for themselves. And self-help is a term that's used, but it's possible to access, and I can give you resources if you want. But you can access lots of websites and material that can help you learn something about what the psychological therapy research is coming up with in terms of what's helpful for people's mental health. They're very accessible, and also possible to look at those things with a Christian lens, so that they're not incompatible with faith. Functional focus, and by this I mean structured, purposeful activity. And this is so crucial for mental well-being, as anybody who hasn't been able to work for whatever reason will know. As anyone who doesn't have something to get up in the morning for will know. As anyone who has maybe retired after a long career and found themselves out of sorts because of that loss of something to be focusing on. And this is an area which I think the church can really come into its own and help quite practically by creating spaces and activities for people to get involved in, so that they have a sense of meaning and purpose in their life and in their day. Building relationships. There's a quote which I'll probably come up to. Life is about relationships. The rest is just details. And there is a fairly famous study, Harvard University, on happiness. which follows a group, which has followed a group of people over decades. I think they're into their 60s, 70s, if not more. And they've tried to find out what are the factors that are associated with happiness and well-being and resilience in time. And as I understand it, one of the key findings is connection, relational connection, and the ability to be in meaningful connection with other people, to know and to be known. And then spiritual aspects. And the Bible has a lot to say about well-being, a lot to say about mental well-being. And one example, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, etc., etc. I like that because it says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. And it doesn't say, let your requests be answered by God. It doesn't say, let all your desires be fulfilled, but it says, let your requests be made known. Let your requests. And there's something therapeutic. There's something freeing. There's something uplifting and encouraging about knowing that we can make all our requests known to God, whenever, whatever, whenever. When I give these, a number of issues come up in relation to diagnosis, and there are pros and cons about having a label for the condition you have. On a plus side, it's shorthand for clinicians, for professionals to communicate with each other and know how to work together to help you. On the other hand, there's a risk of over-labeling things and over-medicalizing things. So not all sadness and misery is depression. Not all fear and restlessness is clinical anxiety. So there's a balance to be had when using labels or diagnosis. Medication, I would say, can be extremely helpful. In some cases, if it's prescribed well and kept under regular review. Yeah. And for some people, life-saving. For some people, significant improvement in quality of life. Yeah. And for other people, it doesn't make a lot of difference. And in some cases, side effects and problems can arise. So there's no one right answer. Can a Christian take medication? Absolutely. Can they take medication for mental health issues? Absolutely. If properly prescribed and kept under regular review, is what I would say. We can talk more about that if you want. Therapy. Again, there's a place for that. For some people, who've never even been able to tell their story in a coherent manner to a trained listener, even the act of doing that can be so helpful, Christian or not. Yeah. For some people, even learning about problem-solving skills and how to manage rampant emotions and how to have a more balanced perspective on life is helpful. even though it may not be explicitly Christian. On the other hand, there are some approaches and there are some therapists who might be antagonistic or who might be discouraging about issues of faith, and that could be a problem that will need to be worked through. Yeah, there are, of course, therapies and counseling approaches which are more Christian and faith-based in nature, and there's a place for those. Do they always work? Nothing always works, but there's a place for those. So can a Christian undertake a course of secular psychological therapy? Yes, potentially. That could be helpful. There might be a few caveats. There might be some kind of orientating discussions to be had, but it's certainly very, very, very possible. And we can talk more about that if you would. The mental health system can be a difficult thing to navigate sometimes. The reality of services is that there's just not enough of them, especially when it comes to psychological therapies. Medication is easier to start. You can see your GP who can start you on medication quite quickly. So that's the easy bit. But if you want a course of psychological therapy under the NHS, then you run into waiting lists and waiting times, which can be quite significant. And that's just the reality of services. The first ports of call, usually GP. In an emergency, sometimes A&E becomes the first port of call. If you're coming alongside someone who is already known to a mental health team and they deteriorate, then the first port of call is their mental health team in relation to their mental health, alongside the GP as well. Okay. And then if you had people in your congregation who work in the mental health system, make use of them to help you navigate and how to get the right referral for somebody who might need it. Yeah. The public health agency produce little Z cards that open up into large sheets that give you lots and lots of agencies and organizations that provide help and support for mental health issues in your healthcare trust area. So there are 5 healthcare trusts in Northern Ireland. So in your area, you can get one for the Northern Trust for this area here. Some of you may have heard of this term, trauma-informed care. It's quite a trendy kind of popular way of describing an approach to helping people which takes into account the role of trauma and how trauma affects people. And when we say trauma, these days, the topic has been expanded, sort of big T trauma, serious assault and big natural disasters and war, to smaller trauma, and that can be, financial hardships and relational difficulties and being put down in the workplace and things which you may not think of as trauma, but can have a significant psychological impact on you. And trauma informed simply means being aware that most of us, if not all of us, and certainly most people who come for help for mental health issues, usually have something in their lives which has been difficult or traumatic in some way, and the spectrum of that is quite large. This is something kind of a bit driven by neuroscientific research as people begin to understand the impact of trauma on the developing brain and how it can affect the way in which the brain matures and the way in which the brain processes information and reacts to difficult things. So you can get a more reactive brain and a less regulated brain with significant trauma in a person's life. And the value of this is to be able to have a more compassionate approach to people when you understand where they're coming from, and when you understand a bit more about their story, things can make a bit more sense as to why they are struggling with the things that they are. And that's the value of this. It gives you a bit more understanding and compassion. But the caution being that we start looking for trauma behind every bush, and it doesn't exist behind every bush. And not everything we see in mental health is trauma related. So it's possible to go to the other extreme, which you want to avoid. What can the church do? 3 C's. So the church carries the message of Christ, the gospel of redemption, the gospel of hope. I'll come to that in the next slide. The church can provide, if it's doing its job well, the church can provide the kind of community, lifelong, stable, loving community, which people yearn for, which people need. Mental health services, mental health clinics are full of people who haven't been able to find their community or a sense of belonging or a sense of being welcomed in a local community, and mental health services becomes their community, unfortunately. And if the church can provide a kind of welcoming, authentic community, you'll help the NHS a lot if you can do that. And culture. Now, I say this kind of, again, this is very big picture, but the salt and light that you can be in your community can affect the atmosphere in your society. Yeah? The way you speak to the checkout person at Tesco, the way you drive on the A57, the amount of money you leave as a tip in the local restaurant. Things which we can do to sprinkle salt and light can change the mood, the collective mood of our neighborhood and our society. Don't underestimate the ability to do that. And then collaboration. So I think that there's real scope for the church and the NHS to work together. The NHS provides things the church can't provide, and the church provides things that the NHS can't provide. So why not work together? I wrote this nearly 10 years ago now. Just when I went through a period of about 2 years when it just became so clear to me that the gospel we've been given and which we seek to live out is a ready-made template for mental well-being. The gospel invites us to think about God first of all. It's his gospel, it's his plan, and the ability to not think about ourselves, or not to be self-absorbed or as someone's called it, the freedom of self-forgetfulness is a liberating truth. To be one of the greatest freedoms is to be free from being self-preoccupied. The gospel starts off, the good news starts off with bad news, right? The bad news of our fallenness, of our brokenness, of our separation with God. So that on the one hand is bad news, but it's also good news, because it's the very thing which makes us realize that we need a savior, that we need grace, that we need help, that we can't do it on our own, that we can experience strength in weakness. Yeah. Justification. So God forgives and imputes righteousness and sees us as being righteous in Christ. Wow. So in a sense, we are actually good enough for now. We are accepted before we achieve. Yeah? Acceptance becomes performance. Yeah. And so many forms of depression and anxiety have their roots in this belief that I need to achieve and perform to be good enough. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm not good enough, and I don't feel adequate, and I don't feel good enough. And the gospel flips that on its head. The gospel says you're good enough because Christ is good enough. And that good enoughness is given to you to start off with. Now, go in the grace of that acceptance and live a good life. So it's very different living from acceptance as opposed to living for acceptance. And the gospel allows for that. I can't think of any other philosophy that does in the same way. Sanctification. So, we're saved, but we're also sealed with the Holy Spirit, filled with the Holy Spirit. We are sanctified, transformed day by day, often through trials and tribulations, but God is working in us, giving us the power to change. And that's precious. Again, it's not something we have to manufacture and strive and strain to become like Christ. And of course, glorification. So, we have a hope that sustains us even when things are bleak and hard and tough in this life, which they will be. And for some of us in the room, which they are right now, and which are weighing you down, so we hold on to hope. It's a little bit about this. I just want to talk about an idea, something that may be applicable to you guys. But for a good number of years now, I've been gathering a small group of men, 5 to 7 people, every couple of weeks, where the idea is desperately simple. Just come and talk together about life in the light of the gospel. And let's just talk about how our lives are going and what's happening, and the ups and the downs. And it's been a good thing. It's not been an easy thing. And it takes commitment. And it does. On a dark, wintry evening, it's hard to get going. But it provides a space to talk about life in a safe and open way, and to reflect on life in the light of the gospel. this is nothing new, and some of you are doing this already. But I would just now I do it with men, and without trying, I've noticed that the topics of discussion invariably revolve around three things: work, family, and personal life, and often in that order. And for men, our work is where we spend most of our time. It's where we interact with other people, and it's where we often have the most stress as well. So being able to talk together about things it's certainly been helpful for me. Caring is hard work. Caring is long term, and caring is not glamorous. It's done behind the scenes. It's done when no one is looking. You don't get a lot of credit for it, and your reward is not out in the open. So, anybody want to sign up? Talk to Nathan after this, and that's what you're signing up for. There are some hard situations that come up, which you won't be expected as a church family. You won't be expected to sort these things out. But some of the mental health situations that can cause significant challenge include somebody who is very acutely unwell. But by psychosis, we mean sort of losing touch with reality, and most commonly manifested the form of delusions, very, very strange beliefs, and hallucinations, hearing things or seeing things and feeling things. Somebody who is actively suicidal, who is, has passed the point of hope, and who is on the verge of actually doing something serious to themselves. That's a scary situation to be in. Somebody who may not even be safe to be left on their own for any length of time. Those are difficult situations. Complex trauma, severe eating disorders, especially when the weight is very low and the physical health becomes threatened. This condition, that's called borderline personality disorder, quite a complex condition, usually associated with trauma, where somebody has very unstable moods, and what we call severe emotional dysregulation, and where they can rely on quite dramatic methods to bring relief to themselves. Yeah. So some people cut themselves, or they take overdoses and take drugs, drink lots of alcohol, and do things. That's very hard to manage and hard to be with. Addictions, especially when the person has no insight or motivation to do anything about it, where it's still everybody else's problem, but not their own. And that's hard. How do you walk with somebody who is clearly in self-destruct mode, but can't see it, let alone want to do anything about it? What you do, apart from pray, and pray a lot. Those are hard situations. You're not alone. So in those situations, you'd want to be working together with people with more expertise and commitment to these areas. So working together with the NHS, I've had some examples of, there's I'm thinking of a case of very good co-working between the mental health service and the local church, there was an agreement that a trusted friend from the local church could come along to the appointments of the person undertaking their therapy, and listen in, and then be able to support the person after the sessions you know, and I thought it worked quite well in that area, and it made me long to see more of that happening. If you're ever going along with someone, a very simple question to ask the professional is, you know, how can we as a church help? You know, is there anything we can do from our end to support this person? And most practitioners, you know, welcome offers of help. So you'd be very, you know, and there might be some suggestions coming back your way. So the church can offer community and support. The church can provide structure and purpose. If we're doing our job well, I think we can reduce the demand on healthcare services. And then Christians working in health and social care, again, the idea of being salt and light. Yeah. I just came from a nursing home overseen by the Presbyterian Church Board of Social Witness that looks after people with profound learning disabilities, you know, and every time I go into such a place, I'm just thinking, this is hard work. Yeah, and this is not easy. But someone's doing it, and you know, if you do it well, the difference you can make to someone's life is profound, and the difference you can make to someone's family. You know, so is anyone here? This is an advertisement for the NHS. Anybody here is wondering what to do with themselves and their career and their time and exploring health and social care? Let me encourage you along and ask you to keep considering it. It certainly is it's hard, it's difficult, like lots of fields at the moment, but it's worth it, and the ability to make a difference is very, very real. Coming to the end, some of you may have heard of biblical counseling. It's an attempt by the church to recapture some of the vision of soul care, of helping people with their difficulties, rather than all of it being seen as mental disorders requiring professional help. Now, there's a place for both. And I like this because it's encouraging the church to consider there's actually more you can do if you want to learn, if you want to grow. There's more you can do that can really help people, and that there's more the church can do, and it doesn't all have to be done by experts, so-called experts and professionals, you know, when it comes to mental health issues. We have a very good links with Biblical Counseling UK, and some of you will know Andrew Collins, who is currently directing the training course run by Biblical Counseling UK, and we have a certificate course running in Belfast, which one of your members is taking part in and being part of. So it's growing. Some other resources: Mind and Soul on the left is again very helpful. Explores the relationship between theology, mental health, and church. There are actually two very recent books came out this year on mental health and the church, and A Christian's Guide to Mental Illness. I haven't read them yet, so I can't tell you anything more apart from just put them up in case you're interested. So after all this, what do you want to do? Firstly, you don't have to do anything. Thanks for coming. Stay for a cup of tea. You don't have to do anything. You can pray, you know, but you haven't signed up to anything here. if you're interested, what is within your gift and ability? How can you help? And I believe everyone can help in some way when it comes to this area. Everyone can do something, even something small. Even a warm welcome to church, even a cup of tea, even making a meal, even childminding, even going for a walk with someone who is struggling. Everything counts, and it's accessible to everyone. I am a klutz when it comes to DIY. I can't, unlike some of you, I can't even hammer a nail straight into the wall. But I think there are lots of people who are struggling with mental issues who need practical help around the house, need things fixed and done, and cars serviced, and walls patched up and so on. Perhaps some of you could help in that way. Okay, now that is all I want to say.